Good morning. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. So welcome to anyone who is watching this. James and I are back for our Sunday morning live, and today we are going to be talking about behavior change, snacking, and metabolism. So we'll start with behavior change. We'll go straight in. James, do you want to give us a little overview
Of behavior change or how, or like habits and stuff like that.
of habits?
Okay. I mean, essentially, I mean, probably use the term habits quite freely, I'd imagine. And basically, what a habit essentially is the kind of the brain's way of kind of making life a lot easier for you. So it kind of removes the thought process out of the equation. So, yeah, when we walk into a room, we probably instinctively just turn the light on without actually thinking about, oh, I need to turn the light on. It's just like an instinctive, natural thing that we've kind of practiced and done so many times. And it's basically triggered by kind of like a cycle of like cue response or cue response kind of reward essentially. So obviously, you walk into a room, it's dark, that cues you to turn the light on. You turn the light on, the reward is that you can now see. Or you feel a bit hungry, you go to the fridge, you kind of you look in the fridge, you go, I like chocolate. You know that's going to be a sweet thing, give you that kind of reward. It tastes good, and then you kind of just build that habit over time, so that every time you kind of walk past it, your natural instinct will be to reach for that thing because it makes you feel good at the end of the day. Um, which is why the big difference between like good, I think, let's say good or positive and negative habits essentially is most of the negative habits have that really instantaneous reward. So you know we kind of want to eat something nice. We eat a nice thing, it tastes really good. You get that instant, really sugary feedback that's like, oh, that tastes good. Whereas our kind of good habits essentially tend to be kind of more, and you kind of get the benefits more in the future. So, we want to get fit and healthy. We go to the gym. That one training session doesn't really have a huge amount of impact now, but 100 training sessions down the line, we've started to see that impact, which is why, generally speaking, bad habits are a lot easier to form and keep going than good habits because we have to be much more consciously determined to start a good habit and keep it going because we aren't getting that instant feedback. So what we're going to have a quick chat about today is basically kind of some quick, well, I say quick, but some kind of easy ways of understanding why that happens and how we can kind of flip the balance so that we can start to build more positive habits and try and avoid slipping into our negative habits quite so much.
That was a good introduction. Thank you. I think it's important to note that once you understand the reason for the formation of the habits, it becomes easier for you to like manipulate that to do what you want it to do. Because it's important. It's an important part of being alive and human because it stops us from having to relearn everything every single time and to actively think about doing it every single time because then we'd be exhausted if like every time we went for a walk we had to consciously be like right foot goes forward, left foot goes forward, hold yourself up. um it would that would be terrible. So if you can make these things work for you, you save yourself a lot of time by not having to constantly remind yourself to do the things that you're trying to do. And I guess this is where like the idea of willpower comes in, right? People think that willpower is the reason that they can't change their behaviors. So then maybe they just don't have enough willpower. Maybe other people have more willpower, but I don't think that idea is very helpful because it almost stops you from trying to just make the patterns, which will allow you to change the behaviors without it being necessarily a fight to do so.
Yeah, I think with the willpower thing, that a lot of people tend to think that like you just said, people who tend to have more good habits or who tend to kind of be able to stick to a diet have just better willpower. And I think the reality of that situation is that willpower is a finite resource. You know, especially you wake up in the morning and let's say your willpower tank is full, so you probably don't feel like you need to kind of have that chocolate bar in the morning. But after a full day of like meetings or work, you're tired. You've gone to the gym, you get home, you sit down, you relax. You're just like, right, I need to cook. You know, in theory, if it was a matter of willpower and you had really good willpower, you would just go and cook. But most people by that point, their willpower is quite drained. It's like, I'm just going to order a takeaway, or I'm just going to get whatever I've got in the cupboard out, or I'm just going to have some popcorn or just something easy. Whereas the reality of it is the willpower does work in the really short term. So initially it's quite useful to make sure that you kind of avoid the initial kind of pitfalls when you're starting a new habit. So the first few days maybe like, yeah, you've got enough willpower to not get the takeaway and cook. But the keys to sustaining that long term is going to be how you change your environment and how you kind of view yourself, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the viewing yourself and your environment are really important. I'd even go as far as saying that willpower isn't as important as people make it out to be. And I think if you can change the story, so instead of being like, I am not strong enough to be able to make these decisions, or I can't stop myself from ordering a takeaway every night, or I can't convince myself to do exercise or whatever. Like, if that's the story, then you're never going to be able to do it. But if you can reframe the story, so it's like, okay, I am a person who cooks dinner, I am a person who does exercise. The more you tell yourself the story of the person that you want to be, the easier it becomes to be that person. And I think that works with everything. So like as with training and nutrition, but also with like who you want to be in life. Do you want to be someone who works hard or who has good relationships or whatever? Like the more you tell yourself the story of whoever you want to be, the easier it is to be that person. You're not constantly blocking yourself by telling yourself the opposite.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
So
and then at least go on.
No, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say then at least every action that you kind of do reinforces that identity that you're trying to create. So every time you don't have that cigarette, you're reinforcing that you're not a smoker.
Exactly.
Rather than seeing it as, oh yeah, I managed to avoid that cigarette. You're actually thinking, right, yeah, I've spent another day as a non-smoker. Do you know what I mean? Rather than you just managed to stave it off for another few hours. It's a different kind of shift in how you view things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a really obvious example of this is how when people become vegetarian or vegan and then they stop eating meat and animal products, they're not making that decision every time someone offers them food, whether or not they're going to eat it, and then weighing up the things each time. They've decided that who they are is a person who doesn't do that. So then once that becomes like their identity, I guess, every time someone offers them meat, they can just be like, oh, no, thank you, I don't eat that. Instead of, oh, maybe do I don't know, no, I said I wouldn't. And I think that it's a really helpful way of helping you make change if you can link it up to who you are as a person.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important thing. There's this sort of a slight kind of, I guess, little part of me that's sort of a little bit cautious of it, doing that to too much of a degree, because then you find actually you end up that you can't do anything but be that very specific identity, because as soon as something challenges that, you're so tied to this identity that actually any change puts you in a bit of a crisis. So to start with, it's really important, but I think there's still, if you have several things rather than just one thing that you're kind of focusing on, it means that you don't rely on that one thing to be a constant to make sure that you can still do what you want to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Your identity should be multifaceted rather than I am only this person, because humans are complicated beings. Okay, should we give people some tips on ways that they can actually implement behaviour change?
Yeah, I think so obviously we just kind of discussed the identity thing, and that's probably your first step, is decide kind of who or what you want to be. So do you want to be vegetarian? Do you want to be a non-smoker? Do you want to be an athlete? Or do you want to be someone who goes to the gym all the time? And those things are kind of your kind of keystones that are going to really help your habits stick. And this works both positively and negatively. So if you can either be, I want to be. So if you've got a habit you want to get out of, so if you want to get out of a habit of eating loads of cake, just be like, I am someone who eats healthily. I'm a healthy eater. that can be your way of flipping that. And you can say the same thing whether you're trying to build a positive habit or build a negative habit. It doesn't actually make a difference with how you frame your identity, if that makes sense. The second step, I guess, is your environment. So your environment's going to enable you to either support what you want to achieve, or really make your life very difficult when you want to achieve it. And I think that's the biggest thing the biggest step people miss out is actually kind of making their environment work for them. They'll assume they can keep everything the same and just build a new habit, when actually, if you're constantly reminded that you've got loads of chocolate in the cupboard or on the side, stop. Like, eating less chocolate is going to be real hard, because you're constantly reminded that cue to eat chocolate is always there. So I think that's got to be the next step.
Yeah, and I think environment is probably one of the easiest things that you can manipulate to make making different choices easier. Because if you can leave fruit on the counter, that every time you go into the kitchen you see the fruit, you'll be more likely to eat the fruit if your goal is I want to eat more fruit. And then the same goes like the biscuits. If the biscuits live next to the kettle, you'll probably have biscuits every time you make a cup of tea. But if the biscuits lived in a drawer, then you'd probably be more likely to only have biscuits when you actually wanted biscuits, instead of every time you were drinking a cup of tea. And small changes to your immediate environment are probably the number one easiest thing that you can do, because then it's not a fight every time to try and make that decision. And that, I think that also works outside of your house. So if you want to be someone who is more active, by changing your environment, you could make friends with other people who are active. So make friends with people in the gym, or join some kind of team, or having people who already do the thing that you want to do more makes it a lot easier, because especially if your existing friends are not interested in those things, then it becomes really hard if your choice is be isolated or go back to doing what I was doing before. Whereas if you can have some other friends to do some other things with, then okay, I don't need to be alone. I can still have friends and have social interaction. And also now it's in an environment where doing so is supported and encouraged, which makes it much easier.
Yeah, I think that's a massive one. It's definitely especially if your current friendship group don't really exercise, let's say, and you want to start. If you're still around that group the whole time, it then becomes a matter of willpower rather than, and peer pressure can be a good thing if the influences are positive and kind of lead you towards what you want, rather than if they're negative, you're more likely to be like, I can't bother because everyone's going to have a drink in the park, so I'm going to go join them. If you join a kind of a group of people where the identity you want to create is the normal for that group, it then becomes really easy to just kind of slot in and actually kind of proceed like that. And I think another sort of thing from outside of the house is, you can change, if you want to go to the gym, or change your route to work so that you always walk past the gym on both ways. Then you don't have to be like, oh, well, if I go to the gym, I've got to walk 5 minutes out of my way. You're going to go past it anyway, so you might as well just pop in and do your session. And the same thing goes for eliminating negative stuff. We spoke about this the other day. Something that I've used quite effectively with clients is, they're struggling to kind of not buy certain things in the shop every time they go. It's like, okay, change your shop. You probably won't go past the things that you kind of instinctively buy then. So it's, you don't see the cue, you don't get tempted to do it, therefore it doesn't happen. And it kind of is that simple. In a sense, we're quite base beings in that sense. We have to have that initial kind of kick out the backside to want to do the activity, even if it's a subconscious one, which can be as simple as walking past a sweet aisle.
Yeah, for sure. And we get into habits really quickly. So if you notice yourself suddenly, I don't know, eating a donut every day or whatever, and you're like, oh, I seem to do this at the exact same time, at the exact same day after I see this exact same thing, you can be like, okay, so do I actually want to do this every day? Yes or no? If the answer is no, finding a way so that you don't see that same, either so you don't see the cue, or so that your response to the cue is something else. So that way, if it's something that you are going to see every day, you just get yourself decide to do a different thing, and then actively for the first couple of days you're doing the different thing, but then the new pattern can kind of settle in after a while. And if that's too hard, just try and bypass that cue completely. So then you don't have to look at the thing that makes you think of donuts.
Yeah, exactly.
When I first started driving to work, because I had to drive past Krispy Kreme, I probably stopped and bought donuts at least every time I drove to work, which was maybe once a week, so not every day. And it's because I drove past it and it was exciting, and Krispy Kreme had a drive-through, and obviously donuts are delicious. So I think what I started to do was just leave slightly later, so stopping to buy donuts would make me late. So then as I drove past it, I was like, well, I can't stop because my first client is in 20 minutes, and if I stop now, I won't make it. And it meant that I was able to stop myself from doing it by not being as prepared in the morning. Because in the morning, I'd be like, well, I want to make sure that I'm there early, just in case there's traffic or whatever. But it just meant that I had too much time. So finding ways to firstly just notice what you're doing. And if you find yourself doing stuff that you're not happy about, then find ways of adjusting the system so that you make it easy to not do that thing anymore.
Yeah, and I think the key there is what you just said is actually you have to identify your initial habits to start with, to have an idea of how you can, make the positive changes, or avoid the negative implications. If you have no idea where you're starting from or what you're doing, because the habits, a lot of them are kind of almost unconscious. You probably, unless you actually sit and think and kind of go through your day, and as you do things, you kind of write them down, you're probably unaware of loads of the things that you're doing. So that's probably a good place to start. Maybe tomorrow morning, something like that. Wake up, have a notepad, and just write down the things that you kind of you do every day. So it might be like, obviously you wake up, fine, turn your alarm off, brush your teeth, have a shower, make a coffee. Maybe they could be your first five, if that's what you do. And then you can go through the day like that. And then once you've done that for the day, you can go back over it and you can put a tick or a cross by all the habits that are positive or that you think are positive towards kind of the goals you specifically want. Obviously, it will vary depending on the person. Put a little cross by the ones that you think are negative or aren't helping you get to where you want. And then you can just put a line next to the ones that make the difference. So like brushing your teeth is not going to make any difference to whether you lose weight or gain weight, for example. And then once you've done that, you can think,
teeth.
Sorry?
It will make a difference to whether or not you lose your teeth.
Yeah, absolutely. But most people kind of, I would assume, that's not an issue, I hope.
Sorry.
So that's something that you can do that's really easy. And then from there, once you've got the ideas, you can think, right, you can either start to use the thing we discussed called habit stacking, where the neutral or positive habits you can build off, and you can link other positive habits to those. And you can also think about, how can I replace the negative habits with something that's more positive? So I don't know, if you're, for example, if you wake up and have a coffee every morning, but you want to reduce your amount of caffeine, you could maybe switch your coffee for, a tea, or for an orange juice, or for a glass of milk, or something different. And then that habit can slowly start to build in, because it's something you do every day. You can change it, and then you'll do that new thing every day at that same time.
Yeah, and with habit stacking, you can hook the things that you want to do. So say you keep forgetting to take your supplements, but you always have a coffee in the morning. Maybe you can take your supplements while you're waiting for the kettle to boil. Or maybe you want to start meditating, but it's really hard and you never seem to find the time. You could start with meditating for a minute while you wait for the kettle to boil. So putting stuff to the thing that you're already doing, that you're going to do every day at the same time anyway. So if you're trying to improve your balance, brushing your teeth standing on one leg, because you're brushing your teeth every day anyway. So then spending some time standing on one leg while you're doing that is easy to fit in. It's not like you have to carve out a specific time in the day to do it.
Yeah.
And you can build on those. So once you've added one thing, you can start linking them together. So then say you wanna be someone who goes running. Maybe you start by just getting your things ready the night before so that you see them in the morning. So then the first layer of the habit is, when I go to bed, I'm going to put my shorts and my trainers next to the bed or in front of my bedroom door, so I have to like cross them to get out. And then maybe part two is I'm going to put them on when I see them, and then I'm going to step out the door. Once I'm out the door, then maybe I'll go for a run around the block. And then as you get better at that, you just keep adding a little bit. What I think is really important is not to overwhelm yourself with trying to make lots of changes at once. So if you have lots of things that you want to do, it's better to pick a couple than to be like overhauling your whole life. Because if you make too many changes, then everything's too different and it becomes a bit jarring. So then it's hard to maintain it, I think.
Yeah, I think probably the key take homes from that would be, you need to make sure that whatever the habit is that you're trying to build or you're trying to stack is definitely at this exactly the same frequency as the current habit. So obviously, if there's a disparity between how frequently you want to do something versus how frequently the thing you're trying to bolt it onto is working, it's not going to work. So you're trying to do, if you want to do press ups every day, but you're tagging it onto a habit you do twice a week, you're never going to do press ups every day. So that's kind of the first key point I would suggest. And then I think from there, you need to make sure that the level that you start your habit, like you said, is manageable. So, a good way of thinking about it is it something that I'm going to be able to do with a 90 to 100% certainty every day? And if the answer is no, then you need to make it even easier for yourself. And if that means that you get to the point where you literally are only doing one press up a day, it's like, right, I'm going to before I brush my teeth, I'm going to do one press up. Fine. If you do it every day, I mean, everyone can do that every day. That's your start point. And then when you've done one, you're probably going to be like, well, I might as well do two now I'm on the floor. And it just feels like that. So I think that's a really important point is and don't try and change your whole life at once.
Yeah.
Because it's too many things. So especially if you've got you're going to have work, you might have kids. It's like you've got loads of other stuff you've got to deal with anyway. Pick one thing to focus on, get that right, and then you can, that might lead naturally onto others anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've said make it easy, make it obvious, habit stacking, environment change. You also want to make it satisfying. So like what James touched on earlier, a lot of the time, the things that we do that are immediately satisfying are often the things that we want to do less of. So like smoking or drinking or whatever, like those things have immediate like positive, well, maybe not positive with smoking, but like your brain is telling you that you're relaxed when you're smoking. So like if you try and find a way to immediately reward yourself with the positive things, it makes it easier to do. And what that looks like for you is gonna be different. But like something that I find quite helpful is like making things a game. So I often track the habits that I want to improve just using a free app on my phone called Habit Ball. So then you can tick every day if you've done it, and then it keeps track at the bottom. So it tells you your success percent rate and how many days in a row you've done it, what the maximum amount of days in a row that you've done it is. And just seeing those numbers is enough for me because I'm like, oh, look, I'm doing better than last time. And I think that works. I think stuff like that can be quite helpful because then it becomes a game, like having a step count competition with your family to see who can do the most steps in a week. Because then suddenly it's not, I'm just going for a walk. It's, oh, well, I want to beat my sister. And maybe there's some kind of prize if it is a competition with other people where the loser has to buy the winner something or something. I don't know. You can figure out whatever works for your particular dynamic. But gamifying stuff just makes it more likely you'll do it because humans like to feel like they're winning, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's that's a really good way of doing it. I mean, obviously that works for specific habits only. Really, I think like some stuff having a like definitive measure is not necessarily the best way of measuring. Like if we're looking at like our weight, for example, tracking how our scale weight goes day to day is useful, but it's not necessarily the only measure. So like other measures are quite useful, like how do you feel and how do clothes fit, stuff like that can be really useful. measures in addition. But yeah, that's a really nice way of doing it, and it's also quite nice. You kind of it's almost like you don't want to record a zero. So even if you have a pretty bad day, like doing something is always going to be better than doing nothing, and arguably probably more important. Than the bad days where you still turn up and do the thing you're trying to do are probably more important than the good days when you're really motivated to do it, because you're reinforcing probably more strongly that no matter what, you're going to be doing this thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that helps you move the baseline. So like if before you were like here and you did some activity, but most of the time you didn't really do anything. And then after a while you're like up here. So then even on the days that you don't really do anything, you're still maybe here. So you're still this much more active or more nutritious or whatever than you were before. And if you can keep kind of edging where your baseline is, then even on the days where you can't really be bothered, it's still better than firstly days where you couldn't be bothered before, but probably even still better than the days that you were trying before, because everything's shifted hopefully in a positive direction.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the key. It's the challenge is just making sure you can keep consistent with something. So I think using exercise is a really straightforward example. If you're having a day where you really can't be bothered to go to the gym, and that does happen. We all get that. Like, there's plenty of days where I'm just like, I don't want to train today. But even if it's just like, you go into the gym, you just do your warm up, and then you leave, fine. You've gone in, you've done something. You're still someone who goes to the gym every day. You're still someone who trains all the time. That's a positive step, even though you've not done the session you necessarily wanted to do. It doesn't really matter. In the long run, it's not going to make a huge difference, but you have at least done some moving, which is again, it's better than doing nothing.
So this is a nice little segue into our exercise snacks then. So we were talking about this the other day. If you don't have that much time or you can't really be bothered, breaking your workout into smaller manageable chunks is a really easy way to get you to do something. So like if you had a plan to do an hour's worth of training, but you really can't be bothered, can you find 20 minutes instead? And then if you've done that 20 minutes, maybe especially now that we're at home, you could do 20 minutes in the morning and maybe a bit later if you feel like you can do something else, then maybe you do another 10 minutes or another 20 minutes of something later. And that could be quite a good way to, I guess, just work with the ebbs and flows of your natural energy and motivation. Because being stuck in the house all day is a bit strange, and it can make it easy to feel like maybe you just don't want to do anything and you just want to lie on the sofa and wait this all out, which is obviously your prerogative if that's what you want to do. But if it's not actually what you want to do, finding other ways to help you stay active will be beneficial. And one of those ways would be to break it up into smaller chunks.
Yeah, it's quite a nice kind of auto-regulatory process, that if you kind of slightly just take away the theory that if you're going to train, you've got to kind of go full send and commit to the session. When you feel like doing that, brilliant. And if you feel like doing that, hopefully you feel like doing that more often than not. If you've got a specific goal in mind, it becomes a bit more important. But for most people who I think just train for health because they want to feel fitter, because they enjoy it, in reality, that's the key point, is your enjoyment is what's going to keep you motivated to doing more. So if one day you're not particularly bothered and you kind of feel like, okay, I can only keep bothered to 10 minutes, just do 10 minutes. If that then turns into, okay, I can do 10 minutes every couple of hours, or 5 minutes even every hour, just to break up the day, do that. That's fine. You can do quite a lot in 5 minutes if you put your mind to it. You could pick a couple of mobility exercises and just work through those. You could go outside for like a 10-minute walk or a 10-minute jog, or anything like that. You could just do 5 minutes of, I don't know, squats if you really wanted. But it's just something that ultimately is getting your joints moving. It's a tick in the box of exercise for the day. It's probably got your heart rate up a little bit. All these things are quite good, and it probably just takes your mind off the fact that you're stuck inside and you're doing some work. That's a win. It's a 5-minute break.
Yeah, and if you can get into the habit of just doing something every day, even if it is only 5 minutes, it becomes much easier then to do more than that every day. But if you're someone who struggles to do anything, going straight into trying to do loads all the time is like, it's too hard. Going back to what we said before, you have to make it really easy. Okay, so if you were going to pick one exercise to do 10 minutes of, just one thing, what would you do?
On a good day, something quite difficult. And I think it probably would be either man makers, just because they do everything in one go. Some sort of clean and press, or some sort of Turkish get up. I think, just because they're all quite good compound movements, and you can, if you have to just do one thing, which obviously you don't have to, but if you did want to just do one thing, they're quite nice skills to practice. They're a bit challenging. They make you think.
So yeah, same with the limited equipment I've got in the house. If I was going to do just one thing, I'd do either some kind of Turkish get-up variation, or a suitcase deadlift, because I have a kettlebell that's quite heavy, and it's heavy enough for suitcase deadlifts to feel quite challenging. And then that's quite satisfying, especially as I really miss lifting heavy things. That's probably been the hardest thing about training at home, is like that sense of satisfaction. But with those, because it's only one-handed and I have to concentrate really hard on making sure my core stays still, it means it's hard enough that it feels good. So probably that too. But if I was in the gym, I'd probably also, if I was going to pick one thing, maybe cleans, because they are also fun and do everything.
I quite like that. I'm also quite a fan if you're just at home. If I'm just picking a couple of bodyweight skills that you want to learn. So I'm a fan of just doing like some handstand work for 10 minutes, because you can do quite a lot and it feels quite hard, but also it's just a bit of fun. It's not really that challenging, like exertion wise, just more like a balance and skill sort of thing. That kind of thing I quite enjoy doing.
That lends itself quite well to 5 minutes a day, because if you're trying to learn a skill, frequency is really important. So if you can do a little bit really often, it gives your brain a chance to figure out what it's doing and how to control the tiny muscles responsible for whether or not you succeed or stumble. And then again, that makes it fun, because then you're like, oh, I couldn't do this at all before, and now look, I have 10 seconds of something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, shall we move on